Well, the oyster job went to Mark Price this week. He's been south to look at the oyster beds in Fovo Strait. More about that later. First, the issue on everyone's lips, a woman bishop for Dunedin. Catholic and Maori leaders have refused to be present at the ordination of Bishop-elect Dr. Penny Jamieson tomorrow, but as Kim Haring reports, the feeling on the street today was different.
In a very informal poll of lunchtime Octagon pedestrians today, the South tonight gauged strong support for the ordination of a woman Anglican bishop. We spoke to 119 people asking them whether they approved, disapproved or had no opinion on the ordination of a female bishop.
I approve.
Okay, you mind just answering two other questions, your age and your religious affiliation?
I'm 43 and I'm Catholic.
I think it's great. I think it's great. It's a good stand for women, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's great too. Yeah, good on her.
God, what's wrong with having a woman bishop?
I approve entirely.
This was by far the largest group. Twice as many supported a woman bishop as those who opposed or didn't care.
I think it's a little bit early. So we've just got woman press not very long ago.
Well, I'm not dead against it, but I don't like it either.
I disapprove. Why is that?
Well, I have been an Anglican all my life, and I don't like women. Well, I shouldn't say that, I don't care for them, really.
You're a woman yourself, though.
Yes, I know, yes, but I think it's a man's job.
Of the 119 we surveyed, only 9, or 1 in 14, were opposed. In a larger group were those people who didn't know or didn't care.
I honestly haven't thought about it.
About a quarter of our lunchtime survey group fell into this category. So, summing up, majority support for Dr. Penny Jamieson, who will be ordained at St Paul's tomorrow. The service will be shown at 12:30 on Television 1 this Sunday.
And reports have just come in of a lucky escape for 25 students from Invercargill's Kingswell High School on a day trip to Hooker Hut in the Mount Cook region. A 50-metre wide avalanche roared down a gully the students were crossing, and a park ranger says it was just sheer luck none of the party was in the way. A commanding structure in the southland landscape has been given a B classification by the Historic Places Trust. Built at the end of last century, it's the Clifton Suspension Bridge near Tuatapere. The Trust thinks it merits permanent preservation. It spans the Waiau River at Clifton and was opened in 1899. It continued in use until 1978 when a new bridge was built downstream. The Bluff Oyster beds are getting more scientific scrutiny than they've had for 15 years. Devastated by the disease Bonamia, which threatens the whole future of the Bluff Oyster industry, they're now getting priority treatment from MAF Fisheries, which is spending $350,000 on them. It's diverted scientists from other work to go south on the research vessel James Cook. Mark Price has been with them.
Fovo Strait early on a midwinter morning is the sort of place a landlubber can expect to be cold, seasick and disinterested in food, especially oysters. But unlike most of this oyster season, today is warm and calm. The problem for the crew and scientists on board the James Cook is the shortage of daylight, which will restrict diving time. Although the weather's good, a diving trip to the bottom of Fovo Strait is always dangerous.
The major hazard around here is the current, which can run up to 2 knots. So it's quite an effort to get down to the bottom. And once we're down there, there's a tendency to be swept away quite easily. So we have to streamline our equipment and huck the bottom to do the dives.
The scientists are here at the moment on a pilot study. They're looking at the best ways of gathering information for the oyster survey planned for October.
It appears that the density of oysters in the Western Straits is very, very low and won't support any amount of commercial fishing. The fishing intensity has been concentrated in these eastern beds, which is roughly a third of the area. And we need to know how many oysters there are throughout the fishery area, how many in the western beds and how many in the eastern beds, so that we can assess how sustainable fishing is going to be in these eastern beds.
So while the divers drop down a line from buoy to anchor and collect oysters by hand from the seabed, the crew try the same thing mechanically from the surface. The grab, however, does not appear to be particularly effective, certainly doesn't seem to be picking up many oysters. Although going after oysters is not what it's all about. What is being attempted is a biomass study, more or less a count of how many oysters there are.
Anything? No oysters.
72 different spots in the strait will be chosen at random, and at each of those spots, the number of oysters in a 1 metre quadrant will be counted precisely. An underwater television camera focused on a quadrant is being tried, but it's hard to count and even tell the difference between live and dead oysters on a television monitor. Diving seems to be the best way.
We're looking at a low density area. There's not a large number of oysters at this end of the strait. We've got to cover the whole fishery area. The dive we've just done had a few dead shells from dead oysters, and very few live ones.
Some dredging is also being tried. At one stage, all 23 oyster boats were offered so the survey could be done by dredging alone. But MAF Fisheries decided a survey by such a big fleet would be unmanageable. Another suggestion, which would involve some oyster boats, has fallen down because boat owners and oystermen can't agree on matters financial. So MAF Fisheries and ultimately the taxpayers being left to foot the bill for the survey. Working away below decks is Dr. Mike Hine, New Zealand's foremost expert on the disease Bunaemia, which kills the oysters. Over a period of 5 years, he's dissected close to 7,000 oysters, tracing the progress of Bunaemia since it was first detected in the far west of the oyster beds.
Over the next 2 or 3 years, it moved down until in 1988, the disease was along this path here. Since then, it's stayed here. It hasn't moved over to this side. It stayed purely over on the western beds. Possibly the eastern beds are more resistant to the parasite because they were wiped out by a similar disease in 1962-63. It could be, therefore, that they're slightly genetically different, slightly more resistant, and therefore these oysters are not suffering from the disease, or will not suffer, to the extent of the western beds.
Bits of the oyster will be analysed under microscopes later to find out more about the life cycle of the Bunaemia parasite.
We found that the parasite depends very much on the reproductive cycle of the oyster. Oysters are male in the first part of the year, and then they change into female in the second part of the year. And in the first part, during the male cycle, the parasite does not proliferate very much and doesn't seem to do the oyster any harm. But when the oyster starts going from being a male into a female, because they are both sexes each year, then the parasite gets into the ovary along with the blood cells, and it seems to use the ovarian tissue as a source of nutrition. And it starts to replicate and divide rapidly, filling up the ovary with parasites. Subsequently, if the oyster does spawn, instead of spawning eggs, it spawns parasites.
Dr. Hine's work has identified the cause of the problem. Its extent is becoming clear. Finding a solution is the tricky bit. The work being done by Drs. Hine and Michael will have a major impact on what happens to the oyster industry next season. In the meantime, they were keen to do their public relations bit for the Bluff Oyster.
This one's got Bunaemia. The parasite comes from a Bunaemia infected area. I tell you, they're very safe to eat.
The tough job. And those lovely pictures from Fovo Strait were recorded by cameraman Craig McKersey. That's our programme for tonight. A big day for tomorrow for Dr. Penny Jamieson, and we hope that it all goes very well. We'll be back tomorrow. Good night.